Welcome back to the Adrian Bo Show featuring Troy Malcolm. This is episode number 133. AB, that was bad of me. That's like a 2 out of 10. I just had to look at my notes to realize episode number 133. I should know that, right? By now, I should know that this is episode number 133. I should know that we are starting to really go up the rankings in regards to podcasts. Thank you so much for letting me be part of it, Adrian. I say it every week, but I really look forward to this time, even though it's random times we do this. Both early morning, late at night. As you can tell, the lights are on here. You've got your background light on. It's late at night again, but we're here delivering a podcast to our listeners because they keep sending in questions. And I think that that's important to continue to deliver content that people and our followers and our listeners see value in. And Adrian, today is all about us as individuals. It's all about us as agents. We will not talk about a shifting market anymore, listeners. Congratulations. That topic is gone. We will not talk about clearance rated auctions. We won't talk about that. We won't talk about interest rates. What we will talk about is talking about holistic success. And Adrian, this is something that you've faced multiple times in your career over the past 35 years. I've definitely seen it. I've definitely worked with you on it, and I've definitely worked with other agents. So this is really topical at the moment. I'm going to hand over to you. Holistic success, Adrian, what does that mean? Because so many people will have a different interpretation of those two words.
Oh, look, there's no doubt about it, Troy. And unfortunately, the only KPI or the scoreboard that most agents, principals, or sales managers tend to refer to is GCI, or number of sales. And that's quite erroneous and dangerous, isn't it, Troy? Like you and I have seen that, we've learned that. I feel that there needs to be multiple metrics when we're talking about holistic success, and certainly it is a barometer. You can't ignore that. Let's not be idealists. We're in sales. We get that. However, the people that you and I work with closely, Troy, we always sit down with them and say, okay, sure, let's look at accountability. Let's look at number of sales. Let's look at GCI. However, equally as important, not what are the sub KPI agenda categories to GCI, but what's equally as important to number of sales or income or whatever financial metric you've got, frankly, is leakage in your business, yes or no? Frankly, customer service levels, is it a 10 out of 10, yes or no? And number 3 is your personal burnout rate and or your relationships with your loved one, your family, and your own health as well, mental and physical health, right? So what's the use of doing 80 sales and having a customer service level of 5 out of 10? Your business literally leaking like a sieve with, email inquiries not getting called back, people not returning phone calls, people coming through open houses not getting called back. You did an appraisal 2 weeks ago with someone and you haven't come back to them. A proposal hasn't gone out. And then also you're just absolutely burnt to a crisp in the sense that, when you go home, you're not spending time with your loved one. You're just constantly on email. And, you don't have a mental health plan, a physical health plan. You don't have a morning ritual. I mean, that's just insanity. So holistic success might sound like a paradox, but I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, Troy, and that's why, we learned this a long time ago, that if we work with anyone, we made a commitment to ourselves that we will never just focus on financial metrics, Troy. It's so critical, so critical.
You're 100% right. And we decided a long time ago, Adrian, when we first started coaching together, was the fact that we wanted to have the success financial as a byproduct of their life. And so that meant actually reverse engineering what they wanted to achieve and focusing then on those goals, as opposed to just going, you need to make an extra 10 sales this year to get to your GCI target. It's all well and good, but if we broke down those 3 areas, and I think that's probably the best place to start, Adrian, is if we break down those areas and we think about leakage as the first part, I would love to do a deep dive if we can and spend a couple of minutes on each to work out what are some of the triggers or what are some of the areas that you think, yes, there's leakage right here? And what are some of the things that you've done in your history, in your career, to get out of that part where there's leakage in your business?
Yeah, look, it's critical. I just got off a Zoom session with a great group in Queensland, and part of my masterclass with these people was identifying leakage, and, really honest, open, transparent people, doing great business, Troy, but wanting to get to the next level. And I went around the group and I said, can we say, hand on heart, every single time we receive a phone inquiry when we've got a property listed, an email inquiry, or we're calling people back from our open houses, that we're identifying if there's any property owners in those inquiries that may not want to sell today, but that you could put them in some sort of nurturing system with touch points, which could eventuate into a listing in 3 months or 3 years. And they said, no. Great. All right. How much money are you spending on letterbox drops and social media and lead generator? Like thousands of dollars a month. I'm like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, you've got the lowest hanging fruit possible, which is vendor paid leads. And we're looking outside of that, so that's one obvious one, Troy, which is, the reactive prospecting that you and I referred to, which is the type of prospecting you do when you've got listings. Okay. Then we look at the dichotomy of that, which is proactive prospecting, which is the type of prospecting we do when we're looking for listings. So things like that include, right, what's a list and sale checklist look like every time we list and sell a piece of real estate? Are we doing an hour of door knocking? Yes or no? Are we doing an hour of cold calling? Yes or no? Are we doing an hour of geo-targeting our own database? Yes or no? Are we using platforms like Reader to generate a transcript for just listed, just sold? Yes or no? Are we doing a social media post, but not just for vanity metrics, but actually boosting it with video content within a 5 kilometre radius? So things like that I think people are just so focused on being busy and scrambling when they got no real listings to get listings, and then when they got listings, scrambling to get them sold. So then they cannibalize the first part of the scramble, which is to find listings. So it can be quite chaotic, Troy, this business, but it certainly doesn't need to be. And when you and I work with anyone, first thing we say is take a deep breath. Let's ask ourselves, if it was easy, what would it look like? Right? And then they tend to answer their own questions, right? And then we just sort of take them on a journey, right?
Adrian, that's the thing. I think a lot of the answers we know we know where the answers are and where they lie. It's the implementation, I think, is the key. And for anyone that's listening to this, I think you really hit the nail on the head in regards to checklists. You had a checklist for every single process in your business. And when I first started very early on in my career, I was told in the office, I think it was by Matt LaHood, right? Matt LaHood was still around. When Matt LaHood, he came to me and said, if you want to get the process right every single time, go and see Adrian, because Adrian's team runs like a well-oiled machine and they have a process for every single thing they do. And I'll never forget coming down and saying, excuse me, Mr. Bo, can I please spend some time with one of your assistants to get all the checklists that you need? And I remember I got probably 30 or 40 checklists, right? And I don't know whether they would be relevant to our listeners. So listeners, don't send an email asking for those 30 checklists, because we're talking about the early 2000s. But what I would say is there is a great range of checklists out there. You probably already have them in your business, listeners. And so what you need to do is you need to take them out and start using them. And Adrian, we always use the analogy of a pilot, an airplane pilot. And I remember my grandfather was flying Cessnas. He had a checklist for everything. If the weather changed, there was a different checklist. If there was fog, there was a different checklist. If something went wrong, there was a checklist that they came out with. So they were always reliant on those types of things. And he always tells that story very clearly. But the same thing applies to real estate. There should be a process and a repeatable, scalable process for everything we do. Adrian, I guess that flows on to the second part, is what we talk about is the customer experience and what that looks like. Because if we have the processes in place, if we stop the leakage, the byproduct of that is the customer experience will be maybe 10, 15 times better, because they'll feel like they're getting service. They'll feel like we actually care about them, and we'll show them that they are actually important to the future growth of our business. How does that work in your brand and your business right now?
Yeah, it's interesting, Troy, because there's no use adding an extra 10 sales to your business if your customer service levels are going to drop. That just doesn't make sense. The idea is to consolidate and process or checklists, whatever, or efficiency, whatever you want to call it, is very closely related to the customer service. Because if you're having a set to sell meeting, for example, before the property goes live, and you're telling your seller that, okay, just want to let you know that the communication process is going to look like this. I just want to let you know that I'm going to speak to you on this type of frequency. I'm going to communicate with you via these types of mediums, and this is what the expectations could be around my level of satisfaction around inspection numbers, open house numbers, contracts going out, internet views, etc. Well, then you really set it, some people call it an expectation meeting, some people call it a set to sell. It doesn't really matter. It's just creating parameters, right? And creating a process. And then once the property is listed, well, then, you got to have a process around how you're communicating with buyers, just equally as important. So, it's an interesting analogy, what you mentioned with your grandfather with flying. I mean, he would have been flying for decades. Yep. And, I assume, even after 30 years, he's still, looking at that checklist, the same as the first time he flew. So it's a great analogy, because I think that a lot of agents can become very complacent and try and reinvent the wheel every single time. And one of the worst, I suppose, traps that agents fall into is they've got a relationship with a client. They assume that they're just going to get the business. So that's where process automatically stops, which is, whether it's a pre-listing or whether it's an agenda-based listing presentation, whether it's going through your unique selling propositions, whether it's advising how the reporting is going to work, and you've just got this entitlement that you're going to get the listing. It doesn't work like that anymore, Troy. So I think that, it's a great analogy that, a pilot is responsible for people's livelihoods. Well, as agents, we're also actually responsible for people's livelihoods as well. Yeah. And the ramifications can be equally as severe. So, look, I think that a process is essential. And I was very fortunate to learn it from the military, because I had exposure from at school at cadet level that, the military were working really closely with us when we'd go on camps, and I'd say, how do I build a latrine? And they're like, well, just go and refer to the SOP. And I was like, okay, how do you build a tent? Go and refer to the SOP. And I was like, how do you do this? And I was kept hearing this SOP. And I was like, then I figured out, SOP was like standard operating procedure, and the manual was like that thick. And I'm like, that just makes complete sense. Like, why having to keep explain, something as simple as building a latrine, building a tent, or putting on a camp or bivouac or bushwalk, whatever, or a survival kit. Like, you just set up the standard operating procedure once, or the checklist once, and then just keep evolving it, refining it, and perfecting it. So I suppose that to me was a penny dropper in life in general,
And I also think, Adrian, the segue to burnout factor, I think when you have to do things for the first time, they can be really, really consuming. And so I feel as if the three that we've spoken about today are very closely aligned, because the burnout factor comes when you're not having a great experience with your customers. You have to be constantly chasing. You don't have the procedures in place, and you're not creating that holistic success. So the burnout factor, I know that every single agent that's been in the business multiple cycles has probably faced at some point in time, a point in their career where they go, you know what, I'm thinking I'm going to get out. I've had enough. It's too hard. Things aren't working. My assistant just left me. They've changed the technology. My CRM doesn't work. I've missed out on 4 listings in a row to clients that I'd done business with before. Driving down the street, saw a signboard from a competitor. Can't believe it's happened. It's too hard. I'm going to do a career change. What are the points in your career, Adrian, if I can ask you, that you managed to identify that you were getting close to burnout? Then you obviously diagnosed the fact that you needed to step back or have a break or change the way you do things to allow you to grow your business sustainably and scalable over the last 35 years. Like, it's quite an amazing feat where your journey has gone from and where it's going to in regards to the EVU structure and the challenges that you've faced in market cycles to still be noticed and recognized as the top performing agent in your area that you operate is very good. So I really want to get an insight into, have you ever identified burnout factor in your career? And then how have you overcome that?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt, Troy. I mean, anyone who says that there's such a thing as work-life balance, and if they're involved in the real estate industry, they're deluded basically, because it's quite a misnomer, this work-life balance. So what we're actually looking at is work-life harmony. That's what you really want to try and master, because if you're continually looking for this balance, well, you'll be doing it forever. So you want to try and make it as harmonious as possible. So there's a symbiotic relationship between work and life, if you like, if you want to call it that. And look, I think the best advice I can give anyone, Troy, is, and I think you might have been there, but we heard the story about those two guys, Cass and someone else, who paddled in a canoe between New Zealand and Australia, I think it was. And they were asked, they were asked plenty of times. They had a sat phone always with them if they wanted to quit, right? And when they finally made it, just the two of them paddling in a canoe, it took them weeks, I think, to get there. And I was like, did you ever want to quit? And they said, yes, a lot. And they said, why didn't you ever pick up the sat phone and just quit? Well, we talked about it, and we said, rather than quitting, what we said to each other is that for the next 48 hours, we were going to paddle at 80% rather than quitting. And I thought, wow. Yeah. I thought, what a brilliant metaphor that is. So I've used that so many times, Troy, because not so much quitting, but at a point where, as you said, losing listings, you get sick, you have an interaction with your colleague, or, something goes on at home, health, whatever it is. Yeah. It's like, you know what, dude, I need to paddle at 80% for a couple of days, or I need to actually paddle at 60% for a week. And you know what? The best part about that is the market, and no one will actually really notice it. It's actually your productivity levels sort of externally might go down a fraction, but, your output's still the same. Your numbers don't change. It's just, you're just controlling and containing your energy a little bit better. So I think you need to budget for that and realize that this is a big part of it, and it's a reality, and there's always an alternative to quitting. And sometimes it means that you just need to reduce the intensity in which you're going at on a daily basis. And look, I've got clients, Troy, where I sit down with them for coaching. I say, if your body had a voice, what would it tell your brain? And they say, go and sleep for 2 weeks. I'm like, great, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Go and sleep for 2 weeks. Because your body needs, sometimes that's right, because they haven't had a break, or they're just like, so great, let's book our session in 2 weeks' time. You go and sleep for, so like you need to close your eyes sometimes and visualize your body having a voice. And if it did, what would it tell your brain? And actually have that conversation, because it's critical. Otherwise, burnout, we say it very loosely, very liberally, but it's something real that you and I have witnessed firsthand, and with a lot of people we work with. It's not a great place to be.
No, and it actually affects more people around you as well. So I think we've got to be wary of the triggers, but we've also got to be mindful that the people around us, some of them are depending on the success of you as an agent as well. So I love that theory, and I can't remember their last names, but I remember
Cass was one of them.
Yeah, I remember that presentation. It was an amazing one. And if we can remember it, we'll make sure we mention it on next week's episode. Anyway, AB, that is time for episode number 133 on the Adrian Bo podcast featuring Troy Malcolm. Listeners, 5 stars, reviews only. That's all we're accepting these days. Make sure you jump on, listen to us on Spotify, on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on every single device you possibly can. We love the feedback. We love the questions. Keep sending them in. AB, we've got a number of episodes that we have in the pipeline that we want to cover off, especially in the lead up to the Australian Real Estate Conference, which is at the tail end of May. So we're going to make sure that we're touching everyone there. You actually, Adrian, are also having a booth at the Australian Real Estate Conference. So that will be great. I will be coming past. I will be at ARIC this year, which is great. We'll be spending some time together at your booth. People can come and see you. They can purchase your product as well. So they can get all that information. But we're going to talk about that leading up to ARIC. We're going to feature a few of the speakers. It's an exciting program. I think there's some hidden gold there as well with some of the speakers that are probably less known than the headline acts. But AB, I just want to thank you again. That's episode number 133. That's it. We're wrapped.
Thank you, listeners. Troy is the best in the business. The best. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Troy.
See you next week.
See ya. Bye.